My stepson abandoned me days before my birthday because his wife whispered I wasn't fine enough. She bragged, "You're nothing without my son. He could do so much finer." I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I just chuckled to myself and walked away. Weeks later, the phone wouldn't stop ringing, and the voices on the other end sounded nothing like confidence anymore. Before I tell you exactly how everything unraveled and why leaving quietly was the most powerful choice I ever made, take a moment to support this channel. Subscribe and drop a comment about where you're watching from. It helps stories like mine reach people who might need to hear them. I'm 80 years old now. My name is Arthur Bellamy. And by the time you reach my age, you learn the difference between love that stands beside you and love that only keeps you around when it's convenient. I married Margaret later in life. We were both widowed, both careful, both convinced we understood what compromise looked like. Her son, Victor, was already grown when I came into the picture. Successful, polished, and used to being admired. From the beginning, I knew my place wasn't to replace his father or compete for attention. I was the steady presence, the man who helped when asked, who stayed quiet when not invited into the conversation. For years, that balance seemed to work. Victor visited often enough. Holidays were polite. Conversation stayed surface level. His wife, Lillian, was cordial in the way someone is cordial when they're already judging you. Tight smiles, backhanded compliments, questions that sounded innocent but carried weight. I ignored it. At my age, you don't go looking for conflict. Things changed a year Victor announced he and Lillian were taking a luxury journey to celebrate his latest business success. A 9-day cruise along the French and Italian coast. Private balcony. Champagne dinners. The kind of trip people post about to remind the world they've made it. They told us over dinner. Victor talked about the itinerary. Lillian scrolled through glossy photos on her phone. Margaret looked excited, almost giddy in a way I hadn't seen in years. "You should come with us," Victor said to her. "You deserve a break." I waited for the rest. It never came. Margaret glanced at me, then said, "Arthur doesn't really enjoy those kinds of trips." She didn't ask me. She decided for me. Victor nodded like that settled everything. Lillian smiled, satisfied. And just like that, I was excluded from my own marriage without a single argument. I told myself it was practical. Someone needed to stay home. Someone needed to handle the day-to-day. I told myself I didn't care. But care has a way of showing up later. In the days before they left, the house felt different. Luggage appeared. New clothes were laid out. Conversation stopped when I entered the room. I became a background object in my own home. The morning they departed, I carried bags to the car. Margaret kissed my cheek and promised souvenirs. Victor thanked me for being understanding. Lillian barely looked at me. When the car pulled away, the silence felt louder than any argument. During their journey, photos flooded the family chat. Sunset dinners, matching robes, smiling faces leaning into luxury. Comments poured in praise, admiration, little digital claps. No one asked where I was. No one mentioned my name. They came back glowing, full of stories. I listened. I nodded. I didn't interrupt. 2 days later, my birthday arrived. No cake, no dinner, no acknowledgement beyond a distracted, "We'll celebrate later," that never turned into anything. That was when something in me finally settled. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. I wasn't forgotten. I was overlooked. That night, I packed a suitcase. I didn't rush. I folded my clothes carefully. I gathered my documents, my medications, a few photographs that mattered. I arranged a temporary stay with an old friend, Ruth, in Hartford. I lined up a small apartment near the water in Newport, Seabrook Flats. Quiet, clean, mine. On the kitchen table, I left a short note. No accusations, no drama, just that I needed space and would be in touch when I was ready. Then I left. I expected confusion, panic, at least a phone call. None came. Days passed, then a week, then more. They didn't notice I was gone. Not until Lillian needed something. That's when the calls finally started. And that's when I understood just how quickly confidence turns into desperation when the person you dismiss stops holding everything together. The first call came on a Wednesday morning, 9 days after I'd left. I remember because I was sitting at Ruth's kitchen table, stirring oatmeal I didn't really want, watching sunlight crawl across the floor like it was in no hurry. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring. It buzzed again. Then again. By the fourth call, curiosity won out. I answered without saying my name. Arthur? Lillian's voice snapped through the line, sharp and annoyed, like she'd been inconvenienced. Where are you? Not hello. Not are you okay? Straight to accusation. I'm taking time, I said calmly. You can't just disappear, she said. Margaret's beside herself. That was interesting, considering Margaret hadn't called me once. I left a note, I replied. If she's confused, that's unfortunate. Lillian exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous. Victor has meetings. He doesn't have time for drama. There it was. Not concern. Not confusion. Inconvenience. I'm not creating drama, I said. I removed myself from it. She scoffed. You're overreacting because of a trip. I smiled to myself. If you think this is about a trip, you haven't been paying attention. She paused. I could almost hear the gears turning. Then her tone changed, cooler, calculated. You know, she said, Margaret depends on Victor more than she lets on. And Victor's always done right by you. That was the first threat dressed as kindness. I think this conversation is over, I said, and hung up. That afternoon, Margaret finally called. Her voice sounded tired, worn thin by confusion. She didn't want to admit. Arthur, why didn't you talk to me first? I tried, I said gently. For years. You just didn't notice. That's not fair, she replied, defensive already. You never complained. I didn't realize I needed to, I said. I thought being included was automatic. She went quiet. I didn't think you cared, she finally admitted. That sentence landed harder than any insult Lillian had ever thrown at me. I did care, I said. I just stopped proving it. She asked me to come home. I told her I needed time. Real time, not promises. Not apologies that evaporate the moment Victor or Lillian walk into the room. After that, the calls multiplied. Victor left voicemails. Polite at first, then clipped, then irritated. He talked about family expectations, about how the situation looked, about how I was embarrassing Margaret. Not once did he apologize. Not once did he ask how I was doing. Meanwhile, I was quietly rebuilding. After 2 weeks at Ruth's place, I moved into my apartment in Newport. Seabrook Flats wasn't fancy, but it had light, clean lines and a balcony that overlooked the water. I furnished it slowly, bed first, then a small table, then shelves for my books. For the first time in years, everything in my space belonged to me. I found a rhythm. Morning walks. Coffee at the same harbor cafe. Conversations with people who didn't already have a version of me fixed in their heads. That's when I met Samuel. He was a widower like me, a few years younger, sharp-eyed and calm. We struck up a conversation one morning when the cafe ran out of pastries, and we both laughed at the disappointment. He didn't pry. He didn't judge. He just listened. Over time, we started meeting regularly. Walks, coffee, long conversations that didn't revolve around fixing anyone else's life. Back in Briarwood, things were unraveling. I heard it first from Daniel, Victor's brother, who texted me late one evening. He apologized for Lillian's behavior and said things were tense at home. Victor's big project had stalled. Some financial decisions hadn't panned out. Pressure was mounting. I didn't respond. A week later, Nora Finch, the same family acquaintance who used gossip at every gathering, ran into me downtown. She looked surprised to see me relaxed, well-dressed, unbothered. I heard things have been hard, she said, fishing. They were, I replied. They're better now. She looked disappointed I didn't give her more. Then came the voicemail. Susan, no, Lillian again. This time crying. I made a mistake, she sobbed. Victor isn't doing well. He needs stability. He needs you. The audacity of it stunned me. Days before my birthday, I wasn't fine enough. Now I was essential. I deleted the message without replying. Margaret tried again, softer this time. She talked about missing me, about the house feeling empty, about how Victor was under so much stress. I listened. Then I said, I spent years being quiet, so your life would be easier. I'm done doing that. She didn't argue. Then Lillian crossed a line. I was leaving work one afternoon. Yes, I still consult part-time, because purpose doesn't retire, when I saw her waiting near the parking lot. Folder clutched to her chest, eyes darting. My stomach dropped. She rushed toward me. Arthur, please. I just need 5 minutes. I told you not to contact me, I said firmly. She opened the folder. Victor's resume. Notes scribbled in the margins. Can you talk to someone? She pleaded. Your connections. That was it. I felt something snap, not anger, but resolve. This is inappropriate, I said, loud enough for 2 co-workers nearby to hear. If you contact me again like this, I'll treat it as harassment. She started crying. Right there. Loud. Messy. I didn't comfort her. I walked away. That night, Victor finally texted. A long message. Apologies. Regret. Admissions that he should have stood up for me. That he listened to his wife when he shouldn't have. That he missed me. I read it twice. I felt nothing. I showed it to Samuel. He read quietly, then looked up and asked one simple question. What do you want? That was the first time anyone had asked me that in years. I didn't answer right away. But I knew one thing for sure. The people who once bragged about how little I mattered were now panicking, because I was gone, and they still hadn't realized the worst part. I wasn't coming back to fix anything. And the next move they made would decide just how far I was willing to go to protect my peace. By the time Victor showed up at my door, I'd already decided something important. I wasn't going to rescue anyone. It was a quiet Sunday evening in Newport, the kind where the sky fades slowly and the world feels smaller in a good way. Samuel had left an hour earlier, promising to bring fresh bread the next morning. I was rinsing a mug when the knock came, firm, uncertain, unfamiliar. I opened the door and found Victor standing there. He looked older than I remembered, not aged by years, but by weight. Stress pulling his shoulders forward, eyes tired in a way success never prepares you for. Behind him, a few steps back, stood Lillian. She didn't look confident anymore. No polished smile, no careful posture, just nerves and desperation stitched together poorly. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Victor said, "Can we talk?" "No," I replied evenly. "You can listen." I stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind me, leaving Samuel's quiet life safely on the other side. I wasn't inviting chaos inside. Victor nodded, already chastened. Lillian opened her mouth to speak. I raised a hand. "Not you." That alone shocked her into silence. Victor swallowed. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it, for not noticing, for letting things go as far as they did. You noticed," I corrected. "You just didn't think it mattered." He winced. "I didn't understand," he said. "You never said anything." "That was your convenience talking," I replied. "Silence isn't permission. It's exhaustion." Lillian stepped forward. "Arthur, please." I turned to her then, slowly, deliberately. "You told me I was nothing without your husband. You bragged about it. You said it like a fact." She started crying again. I didn't stop her. "Now you're here because everything you thought you controlled is slipping," I continued. "And suddenly I'm useful." Victor looked down. "I lost my job," he admitted quietly. "The project collapsed. I made some bad calls." I nodded. "That happens." "I moved back home," he added. I nodded again. "And Mom," he glanced at Lillian, then back at me, "thought maybe you could help steady things." That was the moment I knew. They hadn't come for forgiveness. They'd come for function. "I am not a support beam," I said. "I'm a person." Victor's shoulders sagged. "I know." "No," I replied. "You're starting to." I told them both, clearly and without anger, that I would not be helping financially, professionally, or emotionally, that I had moved on, that I was building a life that didn't revolve around being tolerated. Lillian broke then. She sobbed openly, talking about fear, about appearances, about how people were asking questions, about how she didn't know what to do. I listened until she finished. Then I said, "This is what happens when you teach someone they're superior instead of accountable." Victor flinched, but he didn't argue. I told them to leave. They did. For the next few weeks, things escalated in ways I hadn't expected, but not directly. Emails arrived from unfamiliar addresses, subtle inquiries, requests for clarification. Nothing threatening, nothing aggressive. Just questions tied to Victor's past work, decisions, and financial assumptions. I forwarded everything to my attorney. He called me one afternoon and said, "They're conducting a broader review." I asked if I was at risk. "No," he replied, "but Victor might be." I felt no joy in that, just distance. Meanwhile, Margaret reached out again. She sounded quieter, smaller, less certain of her footing. "I didn't realize how much I leaned on you," she admitted. "I thought you'd always be there." "That was the problem," I said gently. She asked if there was any chance we could try again. I thought about it. Truly. Then I said, "Not like this. Not with me being optional." She cried. I stayed calm. After that, the calls slowed. Victor entered counseling. Daniel told me he'd started attending meetings. Lillian withdrew from social circles she once dominated. The people who used to brag the loudest now spoke in careful tones. As for me, I settled deeper into my life. Samuel and I grew closer, not rushed, not dramatic, just steady. We cooked together. We traveled short distances. We talked about things that mattered without needing to prove anything. One afternoon, I received a handwritten letter from Lillian. No accusations, no demands, just a page filled with regret. She admitted she'd measured worth by image, that she'd mistaken control for protection, that she didn't expect forgiveness, but wanted me to know she understood now. I read it once, then I placed it in a drawer, not to cherish, not to punish, just to acknowledge. Because forgiveness isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's a boundary that doesn't need defending anymore. A month later, Victor sent one last message. "Thank you for not saving me." It read, "I think I needed to fall." I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because the greatest revenge I never planned was this. Walking away so completely that they were forced to face themselves without me cushioning the impact. And as I watched the tide roll in that evening, I knew something else too. The story wasn't over yet, but the ending, whatever it was going to be, would happen on my terms. The last time I heard from Victor was not through a call, a message, or even a letter. It came through silence. The kind of silence that settles after something finally accepts its shape. Months had passed since that night in the hallway outside my apartment. The night I refused to let chaos cross my threshold. Life had found a steady pace again. Mornings by the water. Afternoons consulting when I felt like it. Evenings cooking with Samuel or sitting on the balcony watching the harbor lights flicker on one by one. At 80 years old, routine is no longer boring. It's earned. Margaret and I spoke occasionally, but only when it felt honest. No expectations. No emotional bargaining. She stopped asking me to come home. I stopped waiting for her to understand everything all at once. Sometimes people only realize the cost of something after they've lived without it long enough. Victor didn't reach out again, not directly, but the consequences of his choices moved quietly through his life, the way real consequences always do. Daniel told me Victor had taken a job far below what he once considered acceptable. No title, no prestige, just work, honest work. The kind that doesn't applaud you for showing up, the kind that forces you to learn humility or drown in resentment. Lillian withdrew almost completely. The woman who once bragged about status and superiority now avoided gatherings where questions might be asked. Friends stopped calling as often. Invitations slowed. Image has a short shelf life when reality sets in. I didn't celebrate any of it. I didn't need to, because my victory was never about watching them fall. It was about standing still while they realized I was no longer holding them up. One afternoon, Nearly a year after I left, I received a single email from an address I recognized. Margaret. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. She wrote that she finally understood how much of the family's balance I'd carried quietly. How often decisions were made assuming I would adapt. How my silence had been mistaken for approval instead of patience. She didn't ask me to return. She simply said thank you. I read it twice. Then I replied with one sentence. I'm glad you're seeing clearly now. That was enough. I never moved back. I never needed to. Seabrook Flats became home in a way Briarwood never was. I knew the neighbors. I had my favorite chair by the window. My books were arranged exactly how I liked them. My life no longer felt like something I had to earn by being agreeable. Samuel and I traveled lightly. Short trips. Quiet places. No performances. No expectations. We talked about aging, about regrets, about how strange it is to discover freedom later in life instead of early. He once asked me if I felt bitter. I thought about it for a long time before answering. No, I said. Bitterness comes from wanting someone to understand something they refuse to see. I stopped needing that. And that was the truth. The calls never returned. The messages stopped completely. Even the background noise, the gossip, the curiosity faded away. And in that quiet, something unexpected happened. I felt whole. Not because everything worked out neatly. Not because anyone apologized perfectly. But because I finally stopped negotiating my worth with people who only valued me when I made their lives easier. At 80, you don't need grand gestures to prove strength. You need peace. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't demand respect. I didn't chase validation. I packed my bags, walked away, and let reality do the rest. And that, more than anything they ever said, was what changed everything. Before you go, if this story resonated with you, consider supporting the channel by subscribing and leaving a comment about where you're watching from. It helps stories like mine reach others who may still be learning that walking away quietly can sometimes be the loudest statement of all.